so it's after 6 o'clock. So we're going to call our June 16th Water District meeting to order. Roll call, please, Emma.
President Daniels.
Yes.
Vice President Lather.
Here.
Director Christensen.
Here.
Director Jaffe.
Here.
And Director LeHue.
Here.
All right. So
Okay.
we have no public hearing. That's item 2. So item 3 is the announcement by board members of items to be removed from the consent agenda.
Let's see.
Let's see. Tom?
There was one thing I had a question on. Now I'm just looking. Sorry. Yeah, it was just I had a few little questions on the warrants. So what is that number?
4-3, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Michelle?
I don't have anything to pull.
Okay. Mr. Jaffe? Can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself, Bruce.
I had a question on the warrants as well, so
Okay.
those are already pulled though.
Okay. Carla? Carla, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Carla.
There you go.
Okay.
I just wanted to add a minor comment about 4.8. That's all.
Well, I'm going to pull 4.8 anyway. I think there's some more information about it.
Oh, okay.
4.3 and 4.8. So, do I hear now go to 5.0, sorry, 4.0, and
4.1.
well, we need to do the consent agenda. So anyone want to make a motion for the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Bruce, go ahead.
I'll make the motion to pass the items on the consent agenda that need to be voted on.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Director LeHue.
Yes.
Vice President Lather.
Yes.
Director Jaffe.
Yes.
Director Christensen.
Yes.
And President Daniels.
Yes. So 4.3 and 4.8 will be heard at the end of the business section. So we now go to oral and written communications. And I do not believe we have any public members who wish to speak on that. Is that correct?
Correct. I did not receive any request to speak forms.
Okay. Any director comments?
Well, I'll just repeat, this is Carla. I'll just repeat what I originally started on about the water reuse conference. The deadline to register is tomorrow. It's $150. It's on June 24th and 25th. That's when the conference would run, but all talks will be online until July 31st. So it's an easy way to go to the conference and hear the talks. And Melody just reported that she recorded her talk, so she's going to be presenting. So anyway, that's all.
Anyone else have anything to say?
I think Ron wanted to comment on it.
Yeah, I know I'm not a director, but if I may chime in on that topic, thank you, Carla. Yeah, so if you are interested, please let Tracy or me know tonight, because registration closes tomorrow. And as Director Christensen said, it's $150. We just heard it's real easy. It's like navigating into rooms. I think there's 50 presentations. One is Becca and Melanie. Kirsten Peer, who is a special counsel to the water policy for Cal EPA, is the keynote. I'm sure it'll be good and also different. And just about a month after that is the Aqua Conference. So just want to kind of put that out there for people to think about. Thank you.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, I just had a question about, like, I'm going to be away during that time, but you still have to register by tomorrow, even if you want to like try and get in to access the materials
Later.
later?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and then I just wanted to mention, since we don't have a calendar tonight, that Thursday night is the MGA meeting.
Oh, good point.
So just, went over the agenda, and it's going to be on GoToMeeting rather than Zoom or Teams. So we went on a little review of another format today.
Okay, thank you.
And so Melanie's, for that conference, Melanie's recording the talk?
She's already done that.
So,
Yeah, they pre-record.
so could you give us a link just to her talk? I'd like to hear it.
I'm sure we can figure out something. We'll talk. I'll talk to Melanie offline. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move to reports. We have 6.1, an oral report from our district council.
Thanks, President Daniels. I just had one thing to report. It's actually a case that just came out of the California Supreme Court on the Public Records Act. And the court was considering a portion of the act which allows agencies to recover their actual costs of extracting information from electronic records. So this is the one exception to the general rule in the Public Records Act that we can only recover the actual hard duplication costs from someone who requests. Under this exception, if we need to write a program to extract information or something like that, we can recover the costs of doing so. The issue in this case isn't relevant to us, but it is kind of interesting. It involved a situation where a newspaper had requested body camera footage from the city of Hayward's police department, and the city spent a substantial amount of time redacting some portions of that body cam footage for things that were not disclosable under the act. And they cited the exception for extracting information from electronic record as support for recovering those costs. After making its way up through the Supreme Court determined that this exception does not cover any sort of redaction. It only applies in situations where you're extracting information to pull something out. It doesn't apply to redaction. So unfortunately, it would apply to any sort of similar request that we receive, which requires us to redact an electronic record. In those instances, we cannot recover staff time spent doing so. We're limited to just our direct duplication costs, which in 99% of the cases are zero because it is essentially free to, of course, make a copy of an electronic record. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that case or anything else the board has. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of Josh?
No.
All right, seeing none, let's go to administrative business. There are no conditional or unconditional will serves, item 7.1. So we go to item 7.2, which is to accept the, what is it? Accept the survey results. Is this yours, Melanie?
Yes, this is mine. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mr. Ment. I'd like to welcome him back. Mr. Ment is from FM3, and previously he presented on May 5th when he gave highlights of our community survey to help inform the board during their budget planning process. Mr. Ment has provided public opinion research and guidance to nonprofit organizations, agencies, and businesses since 1998. He regularly researches public attitudes on water quality and water supply, and he has conducted wide range of research for numerous water agencies on topics such as water conservation, to waste and odor, to online bill access, to water supply options, including public views on recycled water. Mr. Ment has received his bachelor's degree from Harvard in government and a master's in public policy from UC Berkeley. At the direction of the board on May 5th, we've asked Mr. Ment to come back tonight to provide a broader presentation of our 2020 community survey and also provide the survey results and his analysis, which were included in the board's packet. Tonight, his presentation will highlight customers' views on the district, what issues our customers feel are important, insights on local water issues, including recycled water and the Pure Water Socal program, and customer relations. He's also has included addressing questions that the board raised during the May 5th presentation. So thank you, Mr. Mentz, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. And I'll just verbally cue you in terms of when to move the slides forward. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Melanie. Thanks to all of you for the chance to join you again tonight. I'm happy today to walk through the balance of the findings from our recent community survey and tell you a little bit more, not just about Pure Water Soquel and people's attitudes toward that program, but about their broader attitudes toward the district and to water issues more generally. As I noted when we spoke in May, we obviously need to view these results with a certain caveat, which is this poll was conducted in mid-January. And obviously we have been through an enormously turbulent time since then in terms of the economy, public health, politics, and issues around social justice and inequity all over California and also nationwide. What we have seen in a range of surveys since the pandemic started, however, as I mentioned in May, is that attitudes on water issues have largely remained consistent over that period of time. While concerns about coronavirus, both its health and economic impact, have become prominent concerns and sort of moved to the top of the list of things that are on voters' minds, they have joined rather than replaced their views on issues relating to water supplies and water quality. And so for those reasons, I'm still very confident that the data we're seeing in this survey on most of the issues we asked about likely would hold up if we repeated the survey today. Although obviously in some nuances, the data may be somewhat different. The methodology of the survey was designed to replicate that of the survey that you conducted in 2015 so that we had an apples to apples comparison of what local residents think now versus what they thought 5 years ago. We conducted just over 400 interviews with registered voters within the district, giving us an overall margin of error of plus or minus 4.7% on the results that I'll share with you tonight. There are some places where you will see that the numbers may not add up to 100%. They add up to 99 or 101. And that's simply because each figure is rounded individually, and that can mean that they round differently than the totals round. So this methodology, again, pretty standard and straightforward in our industry and in line with what the district did the last time it conducted a similar survey. So with that, let's look at some of the big picture views of local residents that we did not discuss in our last meeting. First, we had a question that asked the respondents to evaluate their level of concern with a variety of issues facing Santa Cruz County, and asked them to rate each on a 4-point scale as either a very serious problem, a somewhat serious problem, not too serious, or not a problem in the community. We have ranked the responses here by the proportion that rated each a very serious problem, and then those numbers are totaled running down the right-hand side for the top 2 categories of either very or somewhat serious. So obviously right at the top of the list is traffic congestion. That is one issue that has changed dramatically since the start of the pandemic. In other parts of the Bay Area, we've seen a 20-point drop in concern about traffic congestion for obvious reasons. I think most residents understand that that is not a permanent state of affairs, and so that issue is one that is likely to come back to its former state in the future. Not enough housing is a persistent concern throughout the state, certainly in coastal areas. And then you'll see water areas toward the or water issues toward the bottom of the slide, with 2 in 5 residents indicating that they believe inadequate water supplies are a very serious problem, and roughly 1/3 indicating that saltwater intrusion contaminating drinking water is a very serious problem. For each of those 2 issues, water supplies and saltwater intrusion, more than 3 in 5 residents are rating them as at least a somewhat serious problem. That is a pretty high degree of recognition of particularly the latter issue. In many communities, we don't see awareness of some of these specific challenges to water quality the same way that we do here. Certainly water supply concerns are something that is a constant and prevalent concern for Californians. The numbers aren't as high as they were at the time 5 or so years ago of the drought, but at the same time, they are still a present concern. Now, these questions were repeated from the 2015 survey, and you'll see a comparison on the next slide that indicates how public opinion has shifted over the course of the last 5 years on these issues. Concern about traffic congestion went up, but you'll note at the bottom of the slide, concern about both saltwater intrusion and a lack of water supplies went down compared to 2015. And again, that's simply moving from an environment when a statewide drought was getting a lot of attention. There was a lot of communications focused on building public awareness. Obviously, we're facing both different conditions and a different level of communication today. But those current numbers are still not to be dismissed. They do recognize a broad and persistent public concern about both of those issues. We also asked our respondents to indicate for us where they get their drinking water that they drink at home. And as is the case when we do national surveys, the vast majority of residents in this community do not drink unfiltered water straight from the tap. Fewer than 1 in 5 report that that is generally how they drink water. The vast majority, at 61%, say that they filter it in some capacity before they drink it. Roughly another 1 in 5 say they regularly drink bottled water. Now, for many of these residents, we need to keep in mind that this is not necessarily a conscious choice, that residents may have appliances like refrigerators that have a built-in water filter that allows them to dispense water and ice. And so they're simply opting for the convenience of having water that way rather than being averse to drinking unfiltered tap water. And yet, at the same time, what we see in lots of communities when we do focus groups around the country on water quality issues is people have this very unspecified concern that there is some issue with water quality, some contaminant, some pollutant that might pose a risk to their health, even if they can't name it, or just concerns about taste and odor that lead them to want to choose to drink filtered water. So, looking at these numbers, I would not conclude that this reflects any significant public concerns about water quality, and more just a recognition of a reflection of a pretty broad national trend that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. We also had some questions that were designed to gauge resident views of the district itself. Many of these were repeated from the 2015 survey so that we could detect changes in opinion over time. As you'll see on the next slide, when we ask the fundamental question about the district's overall performance and ask whether it is doing an excellent, good, only fair, or poor job, the numbers are virtually identical to where they were in 2015, and they are heavily positive. 63% rate the district's performance as excellent or good, more than twice as many as rate it as fair or poor. There are relatively few who are in that top category of labeling it excellent. That is pretty much the case for any public serving agency in California right now or nationwide. People are just hesitant to sort of give that most positive stamp of approval to most levels of government. But when you total the excellent and good, it's a very positive response and certainly consistent with what we've seen before. We also asked respondents, as you'll see on the next slide, another question that was repeated from 2015, which is one of the core tasks of the district, finding a responsible solution to the water supply issues facing your area. And we asked the respondents to indicate their level of trust in the district. And again, the numbers really haven't changed since 2015, within the margin of error. 2/3 of those polled indicate that they have at least some trust in the district. 19% say they have a great deal, whereas roughly 3 in 10 indicate they have only a little trust or don't really trust the district at all. Still a 2-to-1 ratio of positive to negative sentiment. Very few voters, again, at the extremes here, and a lot of that may well be because they don't know a lot of details about the district or its operations, but their instinct is that they trust it, and they certainly don't see much reason to doubt the district's work in this area. We also asked about rates, which are always a contentious issue for the public. We asked the respondents to tell us whether they feel that their water bill is too high if they pay the right amount, or if it is too low. Not surprisingly, the proportion who feel it is too low is vanishingly small, only about 1 in 50 local residents. Roughly 2 in 5 believe it is too high, and a plurality, 46%, indicate they feel that rates are at about the right level. However, it's noteworthy that in a follow-up question, when we actually reminded respondents of what they pay, an average of $80 per month or less than 2 cents per gallon of water, that led to a reevaluation of rates. And we saw the proportion believing they're about right go up 13 points, with an equivalent decline in the proportion who thought rates were too high. This is a dynamic we have seen again around the country when we've done polling on the value of water, when they think about it on a price per gallon basis and recognize how much they use, the fact that it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that it's reliably safe as well as abundant. They recognize what a small price to pay that is for such a vital service. And certainly, people's instinct that they may be paying too much is somewhat alleviated when they're reminded about what the amounts in question actually are. There were some variations within the local population in terms of how they felt about rates, which you'll see on the next slide. When we break it out by ethnicity, by income, and by geography, there are differences in the proportion who believe that rates are too high. That perception tended to be strongest among both Latino residents and residents of color. It was more prevalent in unincorporated areas that you serve as opposed to in Capitola. And it was somewhat more prevalent, interestingly, among more affluent households as opposed to among less affluent households. But overall, these differences are relatively modest, and in each case, very few are viewing bills as too low. It's just that balance between thinking they're about right or too high that somewhat varies by subgroup. So with those basic questions asked, we then dove a little bit deeper on people's perception of water issues. I will note there's a handful of questions in here that I'm repeating from the presentation I gave to you in May, just to sort of refresh everyone's memory and put some of the new data in context. We asked respondents to tell us what they saw as being the sources of water for the region, and asked us whether their area does or does not get water from each of the sources listed, as you'll see on this slide. From groundwater pumped up from wells was the only item that a majority identified as a source of local water. 2 in 5 said local creeks or rivers, 21% recycled water, 14% from the Sierra Nevadas, and 7% from a desalination plant. I would note that in national research, when we have asked Americans across the country to identify the body of water or the fundamental source of where their drinking water comes from and ask them to identify it in their own words, what we have found is that only 1/4 of Americans can correctly identify the source of their drinking water. Roughly half admit flat out that they have no idea where it comes from, and there are as many who incorrectly identify the source as correctly identify it. And this simply has to do with the fact that, we've sat in focus groups sometimes and asked people this question, and there will be a moment or two of stunned silence, and then someone will say, well, it comes from the faucet, it comes from the pipes, or it comes from the water company. They just aren't aware of what the original source of that water is. And, for most people, I think it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. If water comes out of the faucet when they turn on the tap, they don't have a lot of reason to investigate further. And so to some extent, districts like yours, you're a victim of your own success, in that if people are getting reliable water service, they don't ask a lot of questions and may not be aware of the details of the water sources that they're ultimately reliant upon. At the same time, as you'll see on the next slide, there is a broad recognition that it is important to have multiple sources of water that are available to serve the local area's needs. We repeated a question from 2015 where we asked people to choose between two different positions. We need new sources of water if we're going to solve our long-term supply problems, or we can solve them by just using less water. In 2015, there was a 3-to-1 margin of respondents who said, no, we need new sources of water. And that margin has been roughly preserved here in 2020 as well. Relatively few believe that conservation alone can address the area's long-term needs. Now you'll note that the proportion who said both neither or that they were unsure has doubled since 2015. And that frankly is an artifact of the change we made to the survey administration this year, where we switched to a blend of phone and online interviews, given that fewer and fewer people have landline phones or pick up the wireless phones they have when they see an unfamiliar caller. And when don't know is presented, or both or neither are presented as options for online respondents to choose from, which they aren't on the phone. That inflates the number of people who choose that option. But fundamentally, public opinion is in essentially the same place it was in 2015, with a belief that it is important for the district to identify new sources of water to serve the area's long-term needs. And as we discussed in May, we tested a range of different perceptions of water supplies for the region. We offered the respondents the series of statements that you'll see on the next slide, asked people whether they agreed or disagreed with each one. And there is a strong belief that the district needs to act now in order to address the water supplies that the region will need in the future. 91% agree, 64% strongly that investment is needed now to ensure we have a reliable, safe water supply for the future. 89% agree, and a 56% majority strongly that the district needs to take strong action now to address overdrafting of seawater and overdrafting of groundwater and seawater intrusion. 79% of local residents say that they've already cut back on water use as much as they can, and there's not much more they can do to save it. And a little more than 2/3 recognize that seawater is already contaminating our groundwater. Again, a pretty high degree of recognition of the salience of that problem, although we have 14% who say that they're not sure. So all of that provides a pretty strong public recognition of the importance of having multiple reliable sources of water that the community can turn to moving forward. And that underlies, as you'll see in the next section, their reactions to pure water Soquel and the concept of recycled water. So we tested, as you'll see on the next slide, the degree to which local residents, just as a basic proposition, are familiar with recycled water. We gave them a description of what we mean by that and distinguished between two types of recycled water. One type that is used for non-potable uses, and the second, which we described as purified recycled water, that goes through a process of indirect potable reuse. We described the mechanics of that process: treatment, addition to the groundwater supply, treatment again, and then distribution to homes and businesses, so that respondents could wrap their minds around these two different types of recycled water. We asked them to indicate if they were familiar with the concept of recycled water after hearing this description, and as you'll see on the next slide, about 3 in 5 told us that they were familiar with the second type, purified recycled water, but only 10% indicated they were very familiar. That is the number that is probably the truer reflection of the proportion of local residents who have a functional knowledge of potable reuse and the use of recycled water for this purpose. There's a natural inclination in surveys like this for people not to want to acknowledge that they lack information about some important issue of public policy. So there's a bias towards saying you're familiar with it, but it's still that relatively small group that identifies themselves as very familiar. And this is very reflective of what we have seen in a range of other surveys about recycled water. Typically, it is between 10 and 20% that fall in that range of saying they're very familiar. After our last conversation in May, I went back and looked at a range of other recent surveys that we've conducted on recycled water issues in communities ranging from the city of Los Angeles to the city of Ventura, city of Roseville, a variety of communities in the East Bay here in the Bay Area, San Ramon, Livermore, Dublin, where we asked similar questions. And the numbers were always very similar to this in terms of people's familiarity with the notion of potable reuse. It starts out as something that most members of the public haven't heard much about. So given that, we also wanted to understand how much people recognize that purified recycled water is available in the community. And for most people, they said they just don't know. The single biggest response categories we had combined were unsure or don't know at 43%. 28% said they thought at least some was being used, but only 7% said a great deal was. And then roughly 1 in 3 respondents told us that they didn't think, they thought no more than a little was currently being used. So basically another indication of uncertainty that residents really aren't sure what the current situation is for the use of purified recycled water. So with that, we moved on to introducing pure water Soquel, as you'll see on the next slide. And we gave people a basic explanation of what the project would do, conforming with that earlier description that addressed the indirect potable reuse process, and noted that this concept of recharging the groundwater basin could help to prevent seawater from entering the basin. So essentially, this description is tapping into these two existing challenges that the public recognizes the district is already facing, both a lack of adequate, reliable supply of water to meet the area's long-term needs, and also the threat of seawater intrusion into groundwater supplies. So given that, it's perhaps not surprising that this project was widely embraced by the public, as you'll see on the next slide. The level of support we had was at 73%. 73% of residents indicating they would be comfortable with the Pure Water Soquel project. 32% who said they'd be very comfortable, but then a larger group that said they'd be somewhat comfortable. So that second group is really I think the target for communications and public education by the district. People who are open to the idea but have some hesitation or some uncertainty. These numbers are very, very similar to what we've seen in almost all of our recent polling, where we've tested similar descriptions of indirect potable reuse in Los Angeles, in Ventura, in the Tri-Valley area. We saw these same numbers, 70% plus, indicating that they are supportive or comfortable after they've seen a basic explanation of what the project would entail. So we also tested a variety of other aspects of customer relations for the district. And as you'll see on the next slide, we asked people about WaterWise and asked people whether they had taken advantage of any of these programs that the district offers. WaterWise home fixtures were the only program that a majority of our respondents said they had taken advantage of at 53%. Rebates for installing other kinds of water efficient upgrades, 40% said they had taken advantage of. And then fewer, less than 1 in 5 respondents, said they had either used a home or business call or done a personal review of their water bill with a customer service representative. Not to suggest that the public would not embrace those services, but simply perhaps that they weren't aware of them because they hadn't taken advantage of them yet. So one of the challenges here, obviously, is, as it always is for public agencies, is communicating with the public and finding ways to reach them that they'll pay attention to. We did some testing of a variety of potential sources of information that the district might use to reach out to the public to provide information about its activities, and asked the respondents for each item on the list if they would definitely pay attention, probably pay attention, or definitely not pay attention to information presented in each of these manners. We have combined the total who said they would either definitely or maybe pay attention and run that total down the right-hand side of the slide. It also may be helpful to focus on the dark blue bars on the left-hand side, the proportion who say they would definitely pay attention. Although those are smaller subgroups, that's reflecting a degree of engagement, which I think is what you want when you have fairly complex information that you're trying to communicate with people. Information enclosed with the water bill still scores very highly, with 83% saying they pay attention, 45% pay a lot of attention. Emails from the district, same thing, 79% and 39%. And presentations from district spokespeople, those figures are 74 and 35. So obviously those are things that the district can directly control, mechanisms by which it can send information to the public that they seem open to receiving. But the single greatest source of information that they rely on is one that the district can't really in any specific way take advantage of, which is conversations with their friends and neighbors. Obviously, to the extent you reach some members of the public, the hope is that they will sort of spread what you tell them to others within their social circle. And that is, as we often find in smaller communities, a major way that information is transmitted. If you move to the next slide, you'll see the lower end of this list, sources of information that fewer local residents said they would be inclined to pay attention to. I would note that there was only one item on the list, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, where we had less than half indicating that they would pay attention. Everything else is over 50% saying they would at least probably pay attention. But a lot of these are dealing with specific websites and local news groups, things like that, that have less of a constituency than some of the broader descriptions like community organizations writ large, local television news or local radio news, which in each case we have 2/3 of local residents saying they would at least maybe pay attention to. So the bottom line coming out of the data, and you'll see here on the final slide a summary of conclusions which reflect both the data from this presentation and then the more detailed information around Pure Water Soquel that we spoke about last month. Overall, the numbers are very encouraging. They show continued positive sentiments toward the district, both for its work overall and in terms of the confidence the public has in you to find long-term water solutions. The public has some ambivalence about their bills, as is often the case, but once the amount that they're actually paying is clarified, we actually see that goes a long way toward making residents feel more comfortable with what they pay. There is broad recognition about the need to address long-term water supply issues and to fight seawater intrusion into groundwater. Although the number of local residents who are concerned about these issues has declined somewhat over the last 5 years, it's still a sizable majority. And we have large, broad, and sort of strongly held convictions among the public that they would like to see the district take action on these issues. And in that context, Pure Water Soquel is widely embraced. Although the public does not know a lot about indirect potable reuse, when you give people a description of the process and that it has benefits both for establishing a more long-term reliable supply of water and also combating seawater intrusion into groundwater, we've got more than 70% of the public telling us that they're comfortable with it, which is obviously a very strong position. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions you might have about this data, what we're seeing in our public opinion research generally in these challenging times, or about what I shared with you back in May.
I don't think we have any public comment on this, so we'll go to questions. Tom, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's good to have this kind of information, and I was wondering if in reflecting on it, whether you could give us an idea of where you think we could make the most progress in any of the categories we'd like to improve upon, whether it's knowledge of the water source. I mean, I'm glad we're doing well in some, but if you particularly saw some things that we could, you know, make a difference on, that would be interesting to hear your take.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, and I think, you know, overall while the numbers are good, there's definitely room to grow. I would say where I would put my focus is on those subgroups that may be positively inclined, but are expressing some tentativeness in terms of their sentiments, both about the district and its work, and also about Pure Water Soquel. We've got, you know, somewhere between a third and 2 in 5 local residents who sort of fall in that category of being positive, but somewhat uncertain. And I suspect in many cases, what's driving that is not any specific ambivalence they have, but simply a lack of information. And so targeting communications to the demographic groups that disproportionately fall in those categories can be helpful. And we can, you know, go through the data and some of the crosstabs and help guide you to some of the demographics that are most likely to fall in those categories.
Well, that would be helpful if maybe you could at least give those to Becca or Melanie, or, you know, for public outreach.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Rochelle, do you have any questions, comments?
Well, I'm not sure how much outreach we do with community, like groups like Rotary or APTA, or like the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe we should be, when people actually go to things again, find a way to do a presentation. I think all of these groups are always looking for presentations, and you know, there's a number of different groups that people belong to that maybe we should be doing more outreach to. It looked like on one of the slides that was one of the places where we could do some improvement, where they said that, I think it was back, yeah, there, let's see, information from community organizations of which you're a member. total pay attention, 74%, that might be a good place to go. I know we've done radio shows before, and there's only so much you can do on Nextdoor and Facebook, but I think we've already hit those. I don't know. I'm just bringing that up because it looked like maybe that would be a good place to put some focus that doesn't cost a lot.
Okay. Mr. Jaffe, do you have any questions, comments?
Great presentation. Thank you, David. I had a similar type of question that Tom had on, there's a lot of things that seem to be working and there are some things that aren't. So I'm glad that, I'm glad that Tom asked that question. In the report, there was on page 79 of the board packet, it talked about of the people who are uncomfortable. And I think this is after, it's question number 15.
Top of the screen.
Yeah. And the people are uncomfortable. It's a bit concerning to me that they don't trust the agency. And I don't know if there's anything that whether that's just the nature of the beast or whether there's things that you can suggest we do. The second most is contamination in the water. So it seems to me like our outreach has to emphasize that a bit more. The other thing that I'll let you respond. Is there anything in terms of just don't trust the agency, whether you...
Yeah. While I'm certain there are some folks who have specific concerns about the district in this regard, much more of it, I think, is just a general sense that this is a very complex and technically difficult undertaking. And we often find that members of the public are just not convinced that any local public agency is up to it. In their minds, it's a very hard thing to do, to take wastewater and purify it to a level where people can drink it. They know NASA does it, but they don't necessarily think that a local water agency is capable of that same task. Not recognizing, obviously, that the technology is widespread, has been thoroughly used and adopted, and is very common. It is sophisticated technology, but it's not new technology. And so I think a lot of that sentiment can be overcome with some public education, especially pointing out to people the number of communities that are already using equivalent kinds of potable recycled water without any public health challenges whatsoever. That can help to elevate people's confidence that this is not as technologically challenging a feat as they might initially assume.
Okay. And then there was a comment, kind of follow on, that you made. I'm a big believer in outreach, especially when there's something that is out of the norm, which purification of water and injection into the aquifer is out of the norm. But you made the comment that you found pretty much that 70-30, 70% in favor once they're educated and 30 against, and they're not. Does that make the argument that we shouldn't be doing outreach, that it's just innate? Or
that 70-30 split is once people have the program explained to them, and that requires education and outreach. If we ask people just straight out, do you support the use of recycled water as part of your drinking water supply? Usually the numbers we get are a 50-50 split at best.
Gotcha.
So really what the poll is modeling here is doing, it doesn't have to be a ton of education, but just getting out the basics of what it is that you're going to do. That can have a big impact in making people feel more at ease. But it is absolutely necessary. We can't just assume that people are getting there on their own.
Gotcha. And before I make a comment to the other directors, did I get it right that people who have a higher income are more dissatisfied with our water rates?
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's pretty typical, don't you think? That people, I don't know, I've found that with people complaining about veterinary bills.
Yeah, I mean, part of it can be that more affluent people are more likely to own large homes and have more outdoor water use and a higher volume of water use in general. And therefore, it may not be actually the rate, it may be the bill that's what's bothering them, but most members of the public conflate those two things.
Okay, and then the other thing that again, this is more the other directors and to the staff, is you had a slide showing that from 2015 to now that there was a decrease in the need for, people thought the need for supplemental water supply. And that could be due to the fact that in that, it was post drought or in the drought, 2015, but it's a bit concerning to me that, I forget which slide it was, but I think I got that right, that it wasn't a huge change, but it was above the
Slide 4.
I think we had it.
And
One more, there we go.
Slide 4. Yeah. There you go.
well, there was this one shows the decrease in people thinking of a problem from seawater intrusion.
Well, no, it's also supplies at the bottom of the slide.
Supplies, yeah. And I remember the asterisk is that one question used current, and one, I guess the one in 2020 used for current and future needs, and the one in 2015 just used for future needs.
Yeah.
But it's just, I just wanted to, I guess I'm arguing against myself that maybe outreach is still very, very important.
And Director Jaffe, this is Ron. Yeah, I think this is, and I think Mr. Metz touched on this. I believe this is a figment of back in 2015, drought was big. I mean, you saw it everywhere in the headlines. It was front and center everywhere you turned, where housing and traffic is certainly, it was until COVID, in front and center in your own life. So I believe those weigh heavily into this.
Yeah, it could just be what's going on in general, but it's a bit concerning. And my last question, not question, my last comment is the presentation is very good, and I'd like to see it attached to the report, or at very least, when we have a website that delivers the report, also delivers, has a link to this presentation, because there's some information in here that is interpreting the report in a more sophisticated way. So thank you for doing this. I think that very valuable.
Okay, Carla, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to oops, screwed up the slide, but I just wanted to remind everybody that these are statistically analyzed, and there was a confidence, the 95% confidence interval was plus or minus 4.7%. So a lot of these sources of information, like the friends and neighbors and information enclosed in the water bill, could be, they're grouped the same. I'd say the top 3 sources of information, that's on page 71 on the packet, those should be all 3 considered highly effective ways of reaching people who need the information, and they're very effective. We shouldn't ever let up on those. Likewise, the Aptos Times, the articles, Melanie's written some, Dr. Daniels has, and we've done a lot of work on the most effective ways of reaching people. And the presentations, we have done that and we should continue that. I think it's extremely important. There isn't really any end after just 2 campaigns, you know, talking to a lot of people during that time to how much more information they can use. I mean, it's very, so the information that once they understand the cost and can put it into perspective, it's very important. So I thought it was really effective to reinforce that our walking orders, you know, the work we still need to do even after the Pure Water Soquel project is online. We still will never be able to let up on the need to provide information to everyone. So very good. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay, my turn now. One point is that there's lots of different categories in here that surveyed, and we should probably decide which ones are important to us. Like, for example, it would be nice if people actually knew where their water comes from, but if they don't really know it too well, that's not a tragedy. Whereas I think them not knowing anything about Pure Water Soquel is a tragedy, because they're doing so much, spending so much money on it, that they really do need to understand that more than some of the other categories. The slide here that Carla was talking about brings up some other things in my mind. It's important not to latch onto one thing, like, for example, latching onto enclosed information in your water bill, because that'll catch some people, but it won't catch everybody. Some people, you know, listen to the radio, and that's their major source of information. Other people read the newspaper, and that's their major source. So it's important to kind of have a spread across there, kind of a blend across these various sources. I mean, certainly you want to emphasize some of the more important ones, but still, it's good not to latch onto one and say that's the one to use. And the other thing that's important, I mean, just in my own block in the last couple of years, 3 of the people on the block have gone away. So they're brand new people here now. So you have to not just do it, you have to continually do it if you want these kind of things to stay where they are and not slip back. You have to keep educating people over and over again. Partly because some people don't even look at it the first time. And there's this old thing about in politics, they say that you have to reach a voter 3 times to have any confidence that they're going to vote your way. And so that's an important thing to think about. And when you're getting new people all the time, you kind of have to keep doing it over and over again. It's not an easy thing to do.
Brings up an idea. I know we'll talk about it at some other point, but just, I wonder if we have any kind of special, I know when people sign up, they come in new. We do have a lot of people moving in.
Yes.
Do we give them a bunch of information about what is going on with Pure Water Soquel and our district and groundwater source? Do we just, or when we sign them up? I don't know.
But in any case, they're definitely people to target because they come in knowing nothing. I mean, the people who just moved in this weekend next door to me were out there using the hose to wash off the sidewalk. They came from Gilroy, and maybe in Gilroy, they don't care about water much, and the water rates are low. And in any case, I went over and talked to them and said, you know, in this community, you don't use your hose to wash off your sidewalk. You know, you use a broom. And, you know, it's important to get to those new people so they understand how serious the problem is, what kind of restrictions we have in this district, and therefore what kind of things they could get in trouble over, and so forth. So it's important. Okay, well, I think we're done with questions and answers. Is that it? Okay, there is a single requested action on this item.
I'll move to accept the report.
Okay,
I'll second.
we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Just a second, not a second. Would you be willing to amend that, not only accept the report, but to include the presentation with it either as an appendix or a link on the website so that people can access that as well.
Yes, it's a very good presentation. I forgot about that, Bruce.
Yeah. That sounds good. I'd add that.
The motion is therefore amended. Roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniel.
Yes. So we now move on to item 7. By the way, thank you for the presentation. We, I think, all are appreciative of it.
Good work. Thank you for
My
the work.
pleasure.
David.
Thank you all very much.
Mhm. So we move on to item 7.3, approve various scopes of work for professional consulting services related to pure water Socal
Thank you.
program and community water plan.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for those, the board discussion on that last item. I didn't have my camera on, but definitely took some notes on that. Becca and I will be working on taking the information from Mr. Mentz's presentation in the survey and how we can continue to modify and improve the outreach. Just in this time of COVID, we've been really researching and learning a lot about how to, effectively modify our outreach during the, this shelter in place. So the welcome kit is a great idea, maximizing social media. We still are doing WebEx meetings, such as Rotary and to SIRS. Just to note, the community survey are all on the website. So we do have the 2014 and the 2015 already on there. And Becca has on her action items to do following this meeting is to upload the presentation, the survey, and the summary analysis. So we'll get that on by the end of this week. Okay, well, thank you. I'm pleased to present this next item for the board's consideration, which is approving the various professional consulting services to support the community water plan in the Pure Water Socal program. Becca, you can go ahead and advance that slide. That was the purpose of tonight's item that I'm presenting. Go ahead and click it. Just to kind of set the stage again, the Pure Water Socal project, the board selected in 2014 that we continue after a year-long public process of evaluating various supplemental water supply options to advance and further evaluate Pure Water Socal surface water transfers and desalination. And specifically with the Pure Water Socal project, they were looking at, really looking at the technical feasibility, environmental analysis, and bringing this project online if it did meet those first two steps in a timeline of 8 to 10 years of operations. So really looking to kind of, I think, realize that our customers had a sense of urgency in addressing the seawater intrusion and the seawater contamination that's occurring, and to go forward with the momentum of evaluating and then implementing the project. So beginning in 2015, the district earnestly started to do that. We conducted feasibility analysis, we launched our environmental review in our EIR. We did several other technical studies, including commissioning the National Water Research Institute. We brought on a program management team, continuing to do groundwater modeling and evaluating the project as it would be in compliance with SGMA. And in 2018, when the board approved the project and certified the EIR, we went into the step 3 of preliminary design and step 4, design and permitting. So currently we're on step 4, and as we embark into the next 3 years, we know that we want to finish the design, go into construction, and then bring the project online. Next slide. The Pure Water Socal project, I think in our early years, we were referring it to, the proposed project as kind of a singular entity, but the program itself really has broadly encompassed more so 3 specific construction projects. And within those 3 construction projects, we have multiple facility sites. So just to kind of reiterate, the Pure Water Socal project is treatment facilities project includes the tertiary treatment facility down at the Santa Cruz wastewater treatment plant and the advanced water purification at the Chanticleer site, those 2 stars. It also includes 9 miles of pipeline, and that's our conveyance infrastructure project, where 4.5 miles of piping, actually dual piping between the 2 treatment facility sites, will run the source water to the Chanticleer site, and then the reverse osmosis concentrate line back out to the outfall, as well as 4.5 miles of pipeline to carry the purified water out to our 3rd project, which is the seawater intrusion prevention wells. And that project includes 3 strategically placed seawater intrusion prevention wells to create that barrier and help replenish groundwater levels at Willowbrook, Twin Lakes Church, and the Monterey site. And then within those 3 injection well sites, we also will be drilling some operational monitoring wells to evaluate the effectiveness of the project. Next slide. So to implement our Pure Water Socal program and the various construction projects within it on that left-hand side, you can see that there is a team behind our program. And I think kind of the way that the district has always operated, we do operate on a very kind of lean staffing model where the boxes in green represent the district staff. So primarily working on the project is Ron, myself, Taj, Skylar, Eileen, and Becca, and assistance and coordination, of course, with other department managers and staff. But we do rely heavily on a suite of consultants to assist us in overseeing and advising on other various program components that I'll go into a little bit later. But I at least wanted to kind of give you a visual of showing the complexities of our program and how we are implementing it. Next slide. So to implement our project, you know, I think a lot of people consider when you put together a project such as Pure Water Socal, or really any kind of water infrastructure project, many people focus on the design and construction costs of a project, or what it entails to design and build a project. But really, there's a lot of effort that goes on behind that. Though the design and construction are kind of considered like the hard costs or the direct costs, and then there's a whole kind of package of indirect or soft costs, and that's what's being presented tonight. And these are the professional services that help support the program. I will say before, Becca, I was going to tell you to go forward, but I wanted to say one more thing on this. You know, typically on infrastructure projects, whether it be water supply or any kind of other municipal project, you're looking at professional services, and we've talked to some other agencies and looked at kind of industry standards. You're looking at somewhere between 10 to 20% or 5 to 15. It really depends on the methods that you're building your project out. For our project, we're looking at about 8% of the program costs are included with these professional services contracts. And I'm going to go through a little bit more on the breakdown of that. Next slide. So you can see this is the that little sliver of our indirect or soft costs or professional services broken out into these different categories. And then the next 2 slides that I want to spend some time on is illustrating that the consultant services that we are bringing forward to the board tonight. First, this is a snapshot just looking at those by category. And you can see that the services for Pure Water Socal that we're seeking continued support on primarily focus on the legal services, both for environmental legal services as well as contractual and construction, environmental permitting, funding assistance, hydrology, land use, outreach, and program and project management services, including technical advisory services. These are all current and existing services that we have with the project right now. And I think one thing to note with the board's consideration is that typically we always bring ongoing services on an annual basis. Becca, if you want to go to the next slide. So typically, what Pure Water Soquel program team does is we look starting in March and we identify what do we foresee the district doing at the program development for the next coming year. And I think we did this, primarily it was done specifically by design. The board and the district wanted to do the Pure Water Soquel implementation in a very stepwise process. We were evaluating the project. It was proposed. We were going to see how the feasibility analysis came out. We were going to do the environmental review. We were going to see how our funding and finances were, and we wanted to make sure that we were going forward with the implementation of the project in concert with where our customers were in terms of wanting the project, where we were financially, and where we were with just the technical data, science, and the environmental information. So in our previous model, what we would do was starting in March, we would start working with our program team, evaluating what the tasks and scope of services that we would need, and then we'd start working with our consultants to identify the tasks and the budget. And we continue to do this even up to last year. Given that we are now embarking and we have, I think this year in 2020, we've brought some contracts to the board earlier in the year with the conveyance project and with the treatment project, and most recently at the last board meeting, our seawater intrusion prevention project. They all now have been procured, that the vision is to design and then build the project. And to support and accompany that, our professional services contracts also need to be in alignment and support that. We recognize that the next 3 years are very critical to the project in terms of ensuring that there's some consistency with the staff, with our program team. And so we worked with them starting in about April. So I really identify the tasks to support the program. And as you can see in this coming 2 years, the effort that we will be putting out really focuses on the design and completing the design, and then entering into some contract agreements for the construction of both the treatment and the conveyance project. It also includes, and that would mean is that we're going to go forward with developing that with our legal team, such as Hanson Projet. We're also working on our permitting aspects of the project. So we're continuing to ensure that we're in compliance with the EIR. We're working on the groundwater replenishment permit and the NPDES permit, which is with the City of Santa Cruz for when the Pure Water Soquel project is operational. And those are permits with the Division of Drinking Water and the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So that's a task that we are going to be focusing on. We're also going to be focusing on the funding aspects of the project. In last year and the beginning of this year, we've gotten the Prop 1 $50 million grant, the Seawater Intrusion Control Loan through the State Water Board, and the WIFIA loan through the EPA. So those will all be initiated, and those will require some grant and loan administration and reporting. And then we'll be entering into the actual construction of the projects. And so we will be including professional services to oversee the construction phase of the project in 2020, in 2021, and 2022. And then as we start bringing the projects online, we'll be bringing on some operational assistance, some continued program management. We'll be still continuing to submit reports to the state and others that are helping fund the project. And as you can see, that green bar there really illustrates where we are foreseeing in meeting the districts and the program's goal of bringing the project online. And we have most of the contracts that we've brought in front of the board tonight are to cover these 3 fiscal years. We do have a couple tasks that are post the project coming online, some operational activities. And so we did extend Montgomery and Associates contract to be a 4-year to make sure that we have included that effort that would require some monitoring and reporting on the performance of the project. Next slide. This table here is included in the staff memo, and again, I think the staff memo, and I printed out here, includes this table that I'm going to spend a couple moments on, as well as 9 attachments, which include a more detailed scope and budget for each of the consultants that we're proposing to enter into these contract renewals with. But as you can see, and I've explained a little bit on the previous slides, we've really identified the primary tasks associated with each discipline and the consultant. And I'd like to at least focus a couple points related to this. In identifying the tasks that we have included in the consultant contracts this year, and as I said, they kind of span a 3-year or 3 or 4-year time period. The budgets associated with that and with all professional services are time and material. So what that means is, and I think we've said this I think in years past, but each consultant will be working on the tasks that we've identified would be needed to support the program. And as we go forward, and again, this is what we are anticipating the scope and tasks to be, we'd be working with the program team and the district staff to identify that the right level of effort and the scopes that we've identified fit the need. And as such, we are able in this kind of a professional services contract to modify as needed. And in modify that, meaning that if there is items that we will not be doing, because this is time and material and these are not lump sum, we just would not be paying for those services if they are not performing those. On the alternative side, there may be things, and to the best of our knowledge, we've scoped out the level of effort and the tasks associated with each of these. But as we go forward, we may have some items that may come up that were not originally outlined. And if there are items where we need to come back to the board to do that work, we would need to get authorization for amending the budget and increasing or adding scope to before we just went ahead and did that work. I think, let me make sure, I'm just making sure I hit those on my notes. Yes. With the preparation of these scopes and budgets, we sought and consulted with colleagues from other agencies in evaluating the proposed budgets and the level of effort to ensure, I think, that we were really maximizing the budgets that we've had for each of these to ensure that the level of effort and the analysis that we've done for cost proposal per task were in alignment with the expected level of services that each team is providing. So similar to some of the other contracts that we've brought forward to the board, it's in with earnest and a requirement that we do some price cost analysis to ensure that the level of effort and the budget meets what we're scoping out. The consultants this year, I think, really also worked earnestly with the district staff to be in parity with the cost-mindedness that Leslie and Ron have set forth with the district staff when we were putting together our fiscal year budget. And with that said, I think that there are some health and safety measures and cost-saving measures that have been implemented into these scopes. Some of these, I think, include we've included more online meetings and less travel budgets. We've also included some capping of salaries and holding the fiscal year 2020 rates to 2029 and limiting annual fiscal year rate increases to 2%, which is also what Leslie has brought into our budget planning efforts. So the next slide, Becca. So I think I'm open for questions for the board to ask specifically to any of the consultant contracts in the attachments, but we do have the 9 possible board actions to consider and approving tonight. And again, I think the consultants that we've brought forward tonight are all consultants that have worked with the district in the past, have added value, both in terms of their level of service and professionalism, their assistance and support with the district staff. They've really helped us achieve many of the milestones that have been set forth for the board. And I feel that this team can continue to work with the district staff to meet the goal of bringing the project online as you desire.
Okay. I don't think we have anyone who said they wanted to public comment on this. So we'll go to the board's questions and comments. So first up is Tom.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you putting all this together, because you know how important it is that we get this done and keep moving forward. And it's a monumental project to organize, and then to try and keep all these players available and moving forward, and contracts at once. It just seems like a ton of work. So thank you for that. My only question had to do with Capital Edge, since we're not meeting and he's not taking us around Washington, and I realize we need something, but I just wondered if it would be maybe less, since we're like a little later phase with looking for grants, and we aren't having a trip to Washington. That was all.
All right. So next would be Rochelle.
Well, as you know, I'm used to doing contracts and having projects completed, and typically the ones that I've done have all been under the cost of the contract. Consultants try to, do only charge for their time, and they don't add extra time if you have good consultants, and I think that's what we have. So I'd anticipate, unless something really crazy happened, that these would be the maximum that we could expect. So if we don't, like Tom had talked about, if we don't have a trip to Washington, D.C., we don't get charged for it. So I don't know if I would suggest renegotiating anything, because it is time and materials in the long run, right, Melanie?
Yes. Capital Edge is a monthly fee. And
Okay.
he is providing some, services. He isn't just on Pure Water Soquel. He does alert us to proposed bills that support anything water related. He's actually kind of pointed us in several directions related to potential grant opportunities for like the stormwater project, drought contingency. He kind of gives us some heads up. So I think with that, Tom, what we may want to do, I don't know if this is the time to talk, or if I should just be receiving information first. But we could talk to him about it, like Rochelle says, an up to amount.
Right, that's all.
But the 8% is a pretty good percentage on a project.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I've budgeted 15 for all these kinds of services. So I'm pretty impressed with what you've done, Melanie.
Me too.
Okay, Bruce, your turn.
Yeah, it was a lot to even just go over, so I can't imagine what it's like to set it all up. Tom,
Mhm.
we had the same question. You know, of all the different services, that's the one that seemed like it was high. So, but since you brought it up, I don't need to bring it up again. On the memo, I just want to point out that before the possible board actions, it said that the district staff performed an independent cost analysis for these proposals. And your analysis concluded that the anticipated costs are in line with the expected level of services and costs to perform the anticipated scopes of work. So thank you for including that, because that was going to be a question. So now I don't have to ask that question. So those are my only comments.
Okay,
Thanks
Carla,
for this.
you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. I went over this. This item on the agenda was the actual beef of the meeting today. Just going through this because a lot of the contracts discussed were completely new to me, or I'm familiar with all of the consultants that you're talking about, but I didn't know exactly how they would fit into this really tightly run project that's going on according to schedule all this time. It's just amazing that we have been able to stay on task, and I credit that with you, Melanie, and these consultants that we've been checking out, I guess, in a way, to see how they'll work to getting this whole thing done. So very impressed, and I think most of my questions were, I didn't focus on the lesser items. I was more, the big ones, because in my past experience, I've had to manage different kinds of projects that were multidisciplinary and several consultants. And it seemed like the biggest consultant proposals were the ones most likely to go over or just go south, because they were just so unwieldy, and the management of them depended on the company itself. But we've been working with them so far, so I think that's doable. We don't have to worry as much as we might have. So I'm willing to go forward on this. I think if this is what it takes to keep this going at the pace it has been going in the past, then this is what we need to do.
Okay, so it's my turn, I guess. I have some concern about item number 2, Brown and Caldwell. That's the group that early on really helped us so much. I mean, when we were talking about the schedule and the cost of design and construction, I mean, they were our main help for that, and we didn't have anyone else to really guide us. So they were absolutely key. But now that we've reached the point where we have other firms doing the actual design and the actual construction and so forth, like in this Brown and Caldwell scope of work, there's a lot of mention about schedules, and I found that just kind of strange, because they're not doing the schedule anymore. The schedule is being done by the conveyance team and the design and construction of the treatment plant and the tertiary facility and so forth. So I don't see why they're even involved with schedule anymore, because anything they have to say about schedule isn't the truth. The truth is going to come from these other firms, and they're great firms that we've hired. We've used Brown and Caldwell in great effort to get some really great firms to do these work and design for us. And so I don't quite see why that's needed. And they also are looking at doing work for what's the other part of it? Schedules and anyway, there's several other things in there which I think are not quite reasonable anymore. I mean, we don't need them to do the kinds of things they've been doing for us before, because we have these other 3 firms we've hired, and they need to be the major responsible firm to be doing those kinds of things. And if you look at the total numbers, they're almost $6 million for 3 years. So that's almost $2 million a year, or $150,000 a month. I just don't see the value we're getting from all those things. We don't need them to carry on like they have been. And so I think their importance in this work is much less than it was. So most of the other things I think are fine, but that one I just see as kind of, well, I don't see what the value we're getting out of all that stuff.
Is it on a still kind of a time and materials thing, and that's a not to be exceeded?
Yes.
So
if we decide not to use them for schedules and other things, then yeah, that would save a lot of money, but it sounds like a staff is intending to use them for that, because that's why they wrote this thing up.
If you let me maybe respond to that, Dr. Daniels, and we can further some discussion. Becca, if you want to go to the pie chart slide, I think would be a good one.
That's what I'm looking at now. It's on page 113.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, the pie chart. Oh, I was looking at a different one. Sorry.
So all the purple is Brown and Caldwell.
So all of the purple is Brown and Caldwell, and I actually had thought about, making that a little bit of a different color. And I think it's important to illustrate that, well, I think Dr. Daniels, you did recognize, I think Brown and Caldwell has been a part of our Pure Water Socal team for several years, really kind of helping us, again, work with some consultants when we were doing the feasibility and with Corollo and ESA with the environmental review, and then the services that they've done in in this last near-term year was really helping us with all of the procurement. Select and bring on Black and Beach and Kennedy Jensen Garney and Jacob Segar, Omar. And I will point out that, over the years that we've had Brown and Caldwell, and I think Director Luther's point is that they've always come under budget. And so again, I think that, time and material, not to exceed, they've shown that we haven't had to modify or do a contract amendment once we identify their scope and in the budget.
Well, I don't have a problem with them coming under budget. I have the problem with the budget.
Yeah.
Having a plus almost $6 million budget means even if they come under it somewhere, it's still got to be a huge amount. I mean, look at this circle. Most of it is purple.
And I'll
let me jump in to help out here. I mean, I think Dr. Daniels' concern is certainly legitimate from looking in from the outside, but I'm going to provide some perspective, I guess, support here. Is that okay, Melanie, if I jump in here? I do want to touch on Capital Edge too, because it's great dialogue. Each of these, with each consultant, I just want to make sure the board can at least rest in confidence that we have met with every one of them and talked about their scope, their rates, even to holding certain increases in the future years. I don't want to go into too much detail. With BC, Brown and Caldwell, even a substantial trim from what was initially thought. And what I'm getting at is the level of detail that we evaluated each scope, not BC, but it is definitely, the larger proportion. And so, Carla, could I ask you to go on mute, please? Thank you.
Am I?
Yeah, it's just, thank you. And this, and going through this with the team, Taj, Melanie, and I are kind of the core looking at this from the district's perspective, and Leslie to some degree. This is what it takes. This is what's needed. And it until you get into it, it does seem like a large amount. But again, if you go back to that bigger statistic that we're on the low side, that pie would be divided up similarly. It would just be bigger amounts. of dollars in there. So I offer you to come in if you're at all uneasy, to dive deeper into this. We haven't done that with you, but a lot of effort has gone into this to reassure, not just in here, but we go out and look at other projects. We're talking to multiple other agencies to see what it looked like for them. How did they divide it up? And also remember, relative to these other agencies, we are a very slim staff, and we've chosen that way because from a macro point of view, we look at this as a big lump in our, as we move forward. So we have hired minimal staff on some of them on just, a couple-year contract to get us through this, to see what it looks like on the other end, meaning that it's the most cost-effective way for our ratepayers to get this accomplished. And I believe some of this is being also compensated by the grant funding also, but that's no reason just to throw it out there. So I want to add that, and then I'll just touch on Capital Edge because it always is. And one thing I want to say about that is really what Capital Edge helps us with is the federal perspective, right? And there might be some savings there. I really appreciate you pointing that out, and we'll have a discussion with the consultant. But the kind of funding we're looking at there and now chasing is not a one-time deal. It's get your foot in the door, some money, and then multiple years in a row. So I do think for the next couple of years, if we're fortunate, which we feel hopeful with the federal funding, that there will be some ongoing dialogue there. So I do think it's wise to we are talking about one of these type conferences or meetings. So anyway, I just wanted to provide those two. I'll lay back and let Melanie take it back over, but I just wanted to, I guess the process is what I wanted to impart on. When we see these numbers, it's a similar reaction. We dive in, and it's multiple weeks and months of, pretty grueling discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would just add in terms of the project and program support of Brown and Caldwell, I want to make sure that, and I don't know if, that top part that says, project management during construction and design and technical advisory services, and the groundwater replenishment and the reuse project permitting, those three pieces right now are where we lay a lot of effort because I just want to reiterate what Ron is saying, is that we don't have a lot of staff here. So we have these three distinct projects: the treatment, the conveyance, and the SWIP wells. And while Taj and I are overseeing and managing those, we don't have the back support that other agencies, like, we talked with Sunny, who used to work and be Brown and Caldwell's, our technical advisor with Brown and Caldwell is now over at Santa Monica. He has a whole engineering department that helps oversee, and a lot of staff that help and oversee different projects. We don't have a lot of staff here besides, Skylar and Eileen, and a little bit of assistance with engineering, but they have their own projects that are going on. So we have relied on having Brown and Caldwell assist us with managing these projects with still, guidance and input from district staff. The program management piece, and I think, Bruce, this is what you're what you're really talking about, is like maybe that piece we don't need anymore, because we've gone through and we've procured everybody. We've got a designer who's going to build it. But our program is pretty complex, and we have distinct projects that need a programmatic level coordination, not just within each of the teams, but also with the multiple interagencies that the district is working with, the city, the county, the RTC, with that all comes into play for the programmatic schedule. And schedule is a driver for the board. Schedule is a driver that the district has really said, we really want to keep the momentum on scope, on budget, and with forward momentum of trying to achieve a project implementation. And that's where, if we were trying to say, well, what would we take off, or where could we limit? That is where, from the programmatic standpoint and what's important to the board in keeping scope, schedule, and budget, we really worked on that piece to see where it could reduce or increase to be right-sized based on where we are. The other big piece, which is, staff and project management support, I think the only way we could really reduce that piece is if we brought people on staff. If we decided not to go out and hire and have Brown and Caldwell assist us, again, we're in this kind of, we're gonna design and build the project, and then once it's implemented, we really don't foresee that we'll have that role to have a staff person here, but that is an alternative that we would have to then just bring people in-house to help support that. Oh, you're on mute. Oh.
Okay. You see down here in the kind of left side of the purple, it says Design and Technical Advisory Services. So why is BNC doing design? We've hired 4 great firms to do the design. The conveyance, the treatment, the injection wells, and services, not services, support and operations. And so I don't see why we're duplicating that. What do we need BNC doing design for? Similarly, if you go down one more, groundwater replenishment reuse project permitting. Well, I know the blue one that says funding financial services, that's the Gutierrez. If you look at her proposal, it talks a lot about permitting. And then you go up one more, I think that's the folks who did our EIR, they have environmental and permitting. So who is doing permitting? And why are we paying for it 3 times? I mean, it just doesn't seem like it hangs together for me. That there's things on here that I don't know who's doing it, because you got it in 3 places, or why are we doing it at all? Design, why are we doing that again? I don't know. It doesn't hang for me. And it's spending a lot of money doing things that look like duplicative to me. But I'm going to shut up now.
Well, let me just, I think early on we made a decision that this was an amazingly difficult and complex project for a small district like us to do, and that we couldn't pull it off without having significant help. And so I understand your concern about doing things that are duplicative, and maybe we could talk to them about making sure we're not like duplicating things, but we absolutely, to me, have to have that really extensive support to keep things rolling, which I want to make sure happens.
Okay. So there are 9 motions for this item.
I have something to say as well.
Okay.
When I read through what Brown and Caldwell is doing, it doesn't quite match what those categories are. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Melanie. Maybe you, Bruce, you're reacting to the designations on the pie chart.
Well, they were also in the document I saw.
Yeah, when it gets down to the nitty gritty of the tasks, the activities that they're doing, it seems like it has different headings than what's on the pie chart.
Yeah, like it says permitting support.
Yeah, I can definitely go into more detail on that. It does match the tasks, and I think what we were doing was trying to really identify it by category, and then the tasks that BC had in their scope rolled up, some subtasks rolled up into tasks. While it may appear that there's, I think some duplicity or duplicity.
Duplicity, hopefully.
No,
Duplication.
duplication. um, there really, it really isn't. And I think, wow, you guys just moved. Dr. Daniels, we don't want to have, we don't want to overcompensate work to different consultants. We're very mindful and efficient in ensuring that we don't have, too many things out there that we don't need to have. Specifically for the permitting, ESA's focus really is on the environmental permitting associated with the project and what is in the EIR. With this being a water infrastructure project, it's a groundwater replenishment project that needs an engineering report called a Title 22. It also needs to have permitting related to the city's ocean outfall. And so that's the effort that Brown and Caldwell is assisting us with, which they have been doing a lot of that effort since we started some of the tasks under the Prop 1 planning grant. So there is a clear distinction between what a consultant is doing in terms of the permitting process. Now, there are permits associated with the project, and as such, there's coordination that we're maintaining. But we are really working at ensuring that everybody has their distinct role and responsibility. Some of the other activities that you may see in the scope that are tied to kind of what we consider technical advisory services and design and owner advisory services are necessary with a design build program. Even with a traditional design bid build, we may have had some owner advisory services or design services. It's a lot smaller of a piece, and so I think I want you to recognize that they're not doing design work while we're having somebody else doing design work. They're assisting us with review of the design, review of the cost estimates, conducting cost validation. So just like what Dr. Jaffe brought up about, doing cost analysis and reviewing the cost, that is part of the design build with this open, transparent process, is getting the design, evaluating how the design builder is proposing to build the project, looking at the project cost. That's all part of some of those within those purple wedges. And those are, again, outside of what we are having our tasking the design builder to do.
Yeah, and this is Ron. I'll just add, if there is any uncomfortability by any board member, because we do value your perspective, and often you do come up with good ideas. I mean, there's already been some tonight. Let's come in. We'll open the books up, and you can dive in with us, and you can look and see if you have any other suggestions. So that offer's always on the table, and so I'll put that out there too. So in case you see something that we missed, you could add value that way.
One last. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it also this is a really complicated project on a very accelerated schedule. And so this is a lot of money to us, all these consultants, but it's a small part of the project, and it is very much backup advisory, giving a second look to this very important design build project that we're going to be doing. That's the ultimate aim of this, with all of its attendant, the land, the permitting to do all this piping to different directions and 2 different directions of the project. It is really complicated. And the 2 different water plants, one down at the city's wastewater treatment facility and one in Chanticleer. So it isn't really too surprising that we have all of this. They're kind of like, hopefully they're able to work when we actually really need them to work and give us advice. And that's the only question, is we have all these people, and will they be able to make that time commitment? And I think that's where the track record of all of them comes in handy, because we know we've worked with them before, and we know whether they'll respond correctly, and they have the expertise. but it's really not too reasonable to have this. It's almost, I think it's almost required in a number of, you know, in really big complicated projects to have a second, always have someone in hand to second look at all these activities that we're trying to achieve at such a time constrained project. So
Just
I don't
one,
know what you were going to say, but that's what I was going to say. It's not really too surprising that they have such a large segment of this project, because they're going to be looking at the whole thing entirely in a way that we need help doing that, because we're so we have such few staff.
and my last comment is that there's a very accelerated schedule to this, and that requires quite a bit of help. And just my perspective on this is that if there's, I want to see this project completed as much as anyone, but if we're moving too fast and not, and that's requiring substantially more money, I would consider moving a little bit slower. So that's just my perspective, and I realize that it might not be the perspective of other directors, but I don't want to do things that are very wasteful, in that, you know, where there's duplication.
Yeah, this is Ron. I'll speak to that. That's always a balance, right? There's a lot of things we're balancing here. And one thing I think to keep in mind, at what we've estimated, just 1 year's delay is $5 million. So that's basically their contract. So I'm talking about time. Plus there's the grant award stuff. So moving at a good clip has its advantages in many ways. It may cost a little bit more, but there's many savings along the way too. So I just put that out there, food for thought.
Okay.
I was going to say that my experience is making something take longer has not ever saved me money on any projects. And, you know, I've done 20 years worth of projects, just, you know, over as old as I am, right? But
Well,
I haven't seen stretching it out reduce the cost of professional services. And then there's the cost of materials and labor. You just don't know.
well, there's also the thing to be mentioned is that we do have a certain amount of momentum, because we're in sort of the grant and nice loan area of this project, which is really going to be a huge help. And I would hate to see us lose that momentum. I'm just almost more concerned about that.
So
I'm an outlier.
logistically, we could vote on all 9 at once. We could vote on the ones that everybody's confident on, and then vote separately on the ones that people are concerned about. And I didn't know, like, with the one that I think both Melanie and Ron said you could potentially talk to the people at Capital Edge. Do we wait on that one to see, or do we, because it's not an emergency, obviously, or do we assume that you negotiate after the fact? Those are just logistical things.
We could approve it with the caveat, or whatever legal term we use, that staff talk to Capital Edge about the time and materials rather than a monthly fee.
Okay. So any other, like I was going to try and figure out how to make a motion on these and still, maybe I'll ask Bruce and Bruce if they would like to have the number 2 separated out for voting.
I don't need it separated out.
That would be fine with me, but I don't think that really matters.
Well, I mean, just so you could vote separately on it if you feel like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that would help me.
Yeah, so maybe I'll make a motion that all the motions except for number 2 with the request that staff make an attempt to negotiate a lower price for Capital Edge.
Or,
For number 4. For number 4.
and is that a lower price or a
Well, just to reflect the actual,
time and materials rather than monthly?
well, I'm just wondering if the monthly would be less because he's not doing as much. So it's just a negotiation to see if we can recognize the fact that there's less work and have that reflected in the cost.
But Director Liu, just a clarification on that, your motion would still allow staff to move forward at the price in the staff report if they're unable to negotiate a lower price? Okay, thank you.
Right.
Okay. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniels.
Yes,
And then I'll make a motion that we approve motion number 2 with the contract with Brown and Caldwell as stated.
And I'll second that one too.
roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
President Daniels.
And no, and that one then passes 4-1. So we are done with that. We now go back to the consent items that we pulled, which was, let's see, what was it? 4.3 and 4.8. So let's do 4.3, the warrants.
All right. So that was, it's just mostly a question. There was on page, oh shoot, where's the page? 22 of 166.
Yeah, here we are.
Near the bottom, there's a payment to the EPA. And I didn't understand, I just wondered, I know it seems like a lot for an application, but is that how much an application is?
So that warrant, this is Leslie, and that warrant was to the EPA for the WIFIA application fee. It is $100,000 application fee.
I mean, I realize we're going for millions of dollars. I just wanted to, and I just thought, wow, that's quite the application fee.
It is indeed.
And then I think the only other thing is, I don't know if this is under is purchase orders a separate item?
It is.
Okay, well, never mind then. It was just a typo thingy, so let's not worry about that. Okay, thank you.
I think somebody else had some issue with 4.3, didn't they?
Yeah.
I just had one question.
Okay.
On page 21, the 100 kilowatt standby generator for the Austrian facility.
Oh, yeah.
Just wanted to, so is this standard to have the standby generators there at all the different well sites, or is this a special circumstance?
I think a lot of these are being put in place because of the PG&E's rolling power outages. We've had to put generators at most of our sites in order to ensure that we can keep the wells pumping when PG&E shuts off the power.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, I think the last rolling power outage, we were only saved because Santa Cruz was willing to send us emergency water. So we don't want that to be our fallback all the time.
So I'll move approval of the warrants if now that I've asked my questions.
I'll second.
We have a motion second. Roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes?
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniels.
Yeah. So now we go to 4.8, the finance status report.
So
Yeah, I just
this,
thought, oh, yeah.
go ahead. I was going to introduce it, but please go ahead with your question.
Oh, I was one of the people, and I just wanted to make the observation of the tiered consumption in units, you know, the 1 and 2 tiers, and it's held fairly steadily over the years. So I think we have, is that what Raftellus originally predicted would happen?
Yes, we're very much aligned with what Raftellus predicted.
Okay.
And this is a report that you guys have seen through the years in various, it's the I&I report, income and investment report. The pieces of it that are mandatory that we provide to you are, of course, the investment fund report and the operating fund information, and our operating contingency reserves, and the cash flow, projected cash flow. So those are all items you guys have seen before, albeit they're being presented to you in a slightly different format. But the new item that I've included on this is the item on page 60 of 166, and it's the residential tiered consumption report. And I'm going to continue to provide this information to you on an ongoing basis. Now that we've passed that 1-year mark, I'm able to go ahead and run this data for you. And this was a lot of the information that Director Jaffe had requested at one point, I think. And one of the questions I think that had arisen was whether or not Raftellus's assumption that 70% of our customers, our residential customers, would see an impact of $5 or less in their bill. And one of the things I would like to point out is that after a year's worth of consumption, I can say that both with a fiscal year-to-date average and the 12-month rolling average, we are right about at that mark. We are just a tiny bit over 69% of our customers are remaining in tier 1. And that means that their bills have not been greatly impacted by the rate increases. But the other thing I want to make sure you understand, I'm going to continue to refine this information as we go forward. What Raftellus included in their analysis was all residential customers, including those that a number of months out of the year don't use any water at all. We do have a lot of those customers. Those customers have not been captured in this data yet. I have to figure out how to pull that reporting out of the new system. And once I incorporate that into this information, that percentage of customers in tier 1 or percentage of customers seeing less than a $5 impact on their bill is actually going to increase. So the analysis that Raftellus did included those customers. The analysis I've given you preliminarily in this report does not, and we're still at the 70%. So I think we're tracking very closely to what Raftellus anticipated when they performed the rate study.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time with this page, and thank you for putting together the numbers.
I'm happy to put it together for you.
Yeah, good work.
Gratifying. It's very gratifying.
Yeah. Thank you to the board
In fact, I
for
think
being
the last time we did this kind of stuff,
patient for a full year's.
the last time we did this kind of thing, we found something like 15% of our customers typically have zero water usage.
Yeah, that it'll be interesting to see when I roll out the next iteration of this report. I'll include those numbers if I can pull them, and I think we'll see some interesting information from that. So I intend to provide this information to you guys on an ongoing basis.
We should also recognize that some of the people in the orange are just tiny a bit amount over the line into orange. So they may still be under $5.
Correct. And you can definitely see that there's a seasonal component to it,
Yeah.
which really
Yeah.
lends itself to being discretionary water use.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, like 4 out of 5 in wintertime are
Yeah.
are seeing not a big change.
What are the units on the left?
Number of customers.
Customers.
1,200,000?
Oh, that one. That's the tiered consumption in units.
That's the for the year. That's the tiered. That's the amount of consumption for the year
In gallons?
in units.
In units.
Units, okay.
750 gallons approximately.
And the top one is the same thing?
740.
Correct. Yeah, the
That's
only
for a
one
month.
that's not, the only one that the middle graph and then the bottom right graph are customers. The bottom left graph and the top graph are units.
Okay.
That's a good suggestion. I think we should label that as one of your evolutions, label the x-axis or y-axis.
I'm just being a nerd, I guess. I mean, I could have
Well,
figured
actually,
it out.
it's always been labeled that. You're right. I used to hammer my students about that. Like, what the heck? Label your axes. Anyway, is it time for closed session, folks?
I think it is.
Vote on this 4.8. I'll move to approve the
I think it was
item
just
4.8.
Information only.
I was information, fine.
but I'm glad you're approving of it.
Yes, I welcome that. I welcome that information in there. That was a nice.
So who's
like-
making the R2D2 sounds?
That's
know.
me. I'm sorry. That's my phone.
That was like a really interesting sound. I'm like, what was that? Are we getting communicated with from above?
Yeah, I thought we were getting Zoom bombed, but let me ask Emma to tell us what the process is to move to closed session. Emma, is that all right, President Daniels, just to make sure we're clear? Emma?
Yeah, hi, yes. So we'll jump off this Zoom meeting and please open the Teams invite that I sent you via email earlier today.
And we have no public comment on this.
Correct, no public comment.
Okay. See y'all soon.
Thank you.
All right, ta-ta for now. The TFN, the wonderful thing about Tiggers.
I love Tig.
No reportable action was taken on 8.1 and 8.2, and the board provided direction on 8.3. The meeting adjourned at 8:29 p.m.